The transmission arrived at the Galactic Council's emergency frequency at 0347 Standard Time, crackling with interference from a dying power source. Communications Officer Zarath of the Centauri Diplomatic Corps nearly dismissed it as another piece of space debris creating electromagnetic noise. But something in the desperate rhythm of the signal made her pause, her four eyes focusing intently on the readout. The message was unlike anything she had encountered in her 30 cycles of service. It came from the outer rim, beyond the protection of Council space, where only the bravest or most foolish species dared to venture. The signal's origin point was the Kepler 442 system, home to the peaceful Valdorians, a species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced agricultural techniques and philosophical wisdom. As Zarath decoded the transmission, her secondary hearts began beating rapidly. The message was brief but chilling. "This is Elder Kethmon of Valdoria Prime. Our world is under siege. The Scarth Horde has returned. Our defenses have fallen. Orbital stations destroyed. Population centers burning. We have perhaps days before total extinction. We invoke Article 7 of the Galactic Assistance Protocol. Please, if anyone receives this message, we are dying. Our children are dying. Send help." The recording ended with the sound of explosions in the background and what could only be described as screams of terror before the signal cut to static. Zarath immediately forwarded the message to the Emergency Council, knowing that it would trigger one of the most significant debates in recent galactic history. The Scarth Horde was a name that sent shivers through even the bravest council members. They were a nomadic fleet of raiders who had terrorized the galaxy's outer regions for centuries, leaving nothing but dead worlds in their wake. Within hours, the council chambers on Centauri Prime buzzed with urgent activity. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in emergency session, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, telepathic pulses, and translated speech. Ambassador Veltar of the Aquarian Federation was the first to speak, her gills fluttering with agitation. "The Valdorians are beyond our defensive perimeter. Sending a rescue fleet would require passage through 3 contested systems and 2 known Scarth hunting grounds. The risk to our forces would be unacceptable." The crystalline representative, whose name was unpronounceable to most species, resonated agreement through harmonic vibrations. "The probability matrices indicate a 93% chance of fleet destruction before reaching Valdorian space. We cannot justify the loss of council vessels for a world already doomed." Elder Morgeth of the Trilarian Collective raised his 6 arms in a gesture of somber acceptance. The Valdorians knew the risks when they chose to settle beyond the protection zone. We cannot save every species that makes poor colonization decisions. Our resources are finite. But not all council members were ready to abandon the Valdorians to their fate. Commander Rexani of the Draconian military caste slammed her clawed fist on the council podium, creating a resounding boom that silenced the chamber. "Are we to become a council of cowards? The Valdorians have contributed to our civilization for 3 centuries. Their agricultural innovations have fed billions across dozens of worlds. They deserve our protection." The debate raged for hours, with species after species citing military projections, resource limitations, and political complications. The cold mathematics of galactic politics seemed to seal the Valdorians' fate. No major military force was willing to risk their fleets against the Scarth Horde for a world on the galaxy's edge. As the session neared its inevitable conclusion, a junior aide approached Zarath with another communication. This one was different, transmitted on an archaic frequency that hadn't been used for diplomatic purposes in over a century. The transmission format was primitive, almost barbaric by galactic standards, but the signal was incredibly strong, suggesting the sender possessed technology far more powerful than their communication methods indicated. Galactic Council, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We have intercepted your communications regarding the situation at Valdoria Prime. Earth formally requests permission to respond to the Valdorian plea for assistance under Article 7. The Council chamber fell silent. Earth was a relatively new member of the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Their species, humans, were considered primitive by most galactic standards, though they had shown remarkable adaptability and resilience. They had been granted limited membership in the Council primarily as a courtesy and to monitor their rapid technological development. Ambassador Veltar's response carried barely concealed condescension. Earth, while we appreciate your willingness to assist, you must understand the scale of this threat. The Scarth Horde consists of over 300 capital ships and countless smaller vessels. They have destroyed civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia before your species discovered fire. What could Earth possibly contribute to this situation? Admiral Chen's response came without hesitation. Ma'am, what we lack in advanced technology, we make up for in determination. Humans don't abandon our friends when they're in trouble. We're requesting transit permissions to Valdorian space. We'll handle the rest. The audacity of the proposal stunned the Council into silence. Elder Morgeth was the first to recover, his tone incredulous. Admiral Chen, according to our intelligence, Earth maintains a fleet of perhaps 50 vessels, most of which would be considered outdated by current galactic standards. The mathematics of this engagement are impossible. You would be sending your entire species to extinction for a cause that is already lost. Elder Morgeth, with respect, you don't know humans very well, Chen replied. We have a saying on Earth, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The Valdorians sent a plea for help. We're going to answer it. Commander Rexani leaned forward in her seat, her reptilian features showing genuine curiosity. Admiral Chen, even if your species possesses some unknown military capability, you would be facing impossible odds. The Scarth have never been defeated in open combat. What makes you believe humans can succeed where entire galactic armies have failed? Admiral Chen's laugh carried a distinctly predatory edge that sent an unexpected chill through the Council chambers. Commander, you're thinking like civilized beings. You're considering acceptable losses, political ramifications, and strategic positioning. You're fighting a war by rules. The Scarth don't follow rules, and neither do we when our friends are dying. The transmission continued, with what sounded like multiple voices in the background, humans coordinating what appeared to be a massive mobilization effort. Council members, we're not asking for your ships or your soldiers. We're asking for transit permissions and stellar navigation data. The Terran Defense Fleet is already mobilizing. Our colony fleets are being recalled. Our deep space mining operations are abandoning their posts. Every human ship capable of mounting weapons is being pressed into service. Zarath found herself studying the human psychological profiles in the Council database. The information was limited, compiled mostly from trade negotiations and cultural exchanges. But certain patterns emerged that suddenly seemed far more significant. Humans were noted for their emotional attachments, their tendency to form bonds with other species, and their apparently irrational willingness to sacrifice for principles rather than pragmatic gain. Ambassador Veltar attempted to inject some rationality into the proceedings. Admiral Chen, we must consider the broader implications. If Earth's fleet is destroyed attempting this rescue, humanity will be defenseless against retaliation. The Scarth are known to pursue vengeance against those who oppose them. You would be condemning your entire species for the sake of one doomed world. The response that came back would later be recorded in galactic historical archives as the moment many species began to truly understand what humans were capable of. Ambassador Veltar, you're still not getting it. Humans don't calculate the odds when someone needs help. We don't weigh the costs when our friends are in danger. The Valdorians are dying, and they asked for help. That's all we need to know." Admiral Chen's voice took on a harder edge. "And as for the Scarth seeking revenge against Earth, let them come. They'll find out why our world is classified as a death world in your databases. They'll discover what happens when you threaten the home of a species that climbed to the top of a food chain filled with apex predators." The council chamber erupted in competing voices as species debated the wisdom of allowing the humans to proceed. The more cautious members argued that Earth's destruction would destabilize their entire sector. The pragmatists insisted that human intervention would only result in 2 dead civilizations instead of 1. But a growing number of representatives found themselves intrigued by humanity's unexpected boldness. Commander Rexani, whose own species valued courage above all else, stood to address the chamber. "I propose we grant the humans their requested transit permissions. If they wish to die gloriously for their principles, that is their choice to make. Perhaps their sacrifice will provide valuable intelligence about Scarth tactics." As the formal vote was called, Zarath realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species barely 2 centuries out of their home system was preparing to challenge the most feared military force in the galaxy, not for conquest or resources, but simply because someone had asked for help. The transit permissions were granted by a narrow margin, with many representatives abstaining rather than take responsibility for humanity's likely extinction. As the council session concluded, Zarath found herself monitoring human communications networks, watching in fascination as an entire species mobilized for a war they had no reasonable hope of winning. The data streams showed massive industrial complexes converting from peaceful production to military manufacturing. Civilian vessels were being retrofitted with weapon systems. Training academies were accelerating their programs, graduating entire classes early to crew the expanding fleet. Most remarkably, the communications she intercepted showed no fear, no doubt, no debate about whether the mission was worthwhile. Humans, it seemed, had made their decision the moment they heard the Valdorian plea for help. As Admiral Chen's final transmission reached the Council before the Terran fleet departed, her words would echo through galactic consciousness for generations to come. "Council members, the Valdorians called for help. The galaxy's civilized species calculated the odds and chose safety. Today, you're going to see what happens when Deathworlders hear a cry for help. We'll show you what humans do when the innocent are threatened and the odds are impossible." The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, various species found them. 3 days after the Terran fleet departed Earth, Valdoria Prime burned under the relentless assault of the Scarth horde. Elder Kethmon huddled with the last of his people in the deep caves beneath Mount Serenity, listening to the thunder of orbital bombardments that shook dust from ancient stone walls. The Valdorians, a peaceful species that had never known true warfare, watched their children tremble with each explosion, their large eyes reflecting the fear that gripped every survivor. The Scarth had been methodical in their destruction. First, they eliminated all orbital defenses and communication arrays. Then came the systematic destruction of major population centers, industrial complexes, and transportation networks. They weren't interested in quick extermination. The Scarth fed on terror and despair. They wanted their victims to suffer, to lose hope slowly, to understand their complete helplessness before the end came. High above the planet, War Master Graktul of the Scarth 7th Fleet surveyed his prize from the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Render. The massive dreadnought, built from the hulls of conquered vessels and decorated with the skeletal remains of defeated enemies, represented the pinnacle of Scarth military might. Around him, his bridge crew of various conquered species worked in silent terror, knowing that any mistake would result in immediate execution. Graktul's scarred face showed satisfaction as he reviewed the destruction reports. The Valdorians had put up no meaningful resistance. Their pathetic defense fleet had been swept aside in minutes. Their planetary shields had crumbled under the first serious bombardment. Now came the part he enjoyed most, the slow harvest of despair before the final blow. "Censor officer," Graktul growled, his voice carrying the authority of a being who had conquered 17 worlds. "Report on remaining population centers." The enslaved Zephyrian at the censor station, his once beautiful crystalline features now scarred and dulled, responded in a trembling voice. "War Master, thermal scans indicate approximately 2 million Valdorians remain alive in scattered underground facilities. Surface resistance has been eliminated entirely." Graktul's lipless mouth curved in what passed for a smile among his species. "Excellent. Begin Phase 3. I want landing parties deployed to hunt down the survivors. Remember, the fleet captains who bring me the most terror recordings will receive bonus shares in the next conquest." As Scarth landing craft began their descent toward Valdoria Prime, a new alarm rang through the Bone Render's bridge. The communications officer, a conquered human from a previous raid, looked up from his station with an expression of confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. "War Master," the human slave said carefully, "we're receiving multiple hyperspace emergence signatures at the edge of the system. Configuration unknown." Graktul's eyes narrowed. The Galactic Council had never interfered with Scarth operations before. Their calculated cowardice had always ensured that their raids proceeded without outside intervention. "Show me," he commanded. The main viewing screen shifted to display the system's edge, where space itself began to tear open in brilliant flashes of hyperspace emergence. What emerged defied every tactical analysis the Scarth had developed over centuries of warfare. The ships were small by galactic standards, primitive in design, but they kept coming. Dozens became hundreds, hundreds became thousands. "What fleet is this?" Graktul demanded, his confidence beginning to waver as more and more ships continued to emerge from hyperspace. The human communications officer studied his instruments with growing amazement. "War Master, the ships are identifying themselves as the Terran Defense Fleet, Colonial Guard, Mining Guild Security, Corporate Protection Services, and, sir, some of these vessels are identifying as civilian ships with emergency military authorization." Graktul's tactical advisor, a conquered Draconian who had served the Scarth for 20 cycles, studied the emerging fleet with professional interest. "War Master, initial analysis suggests over 8,000 vessels of varying configurations. Most appear to be converted civilian craft with improvised weapon systems. The technology level appears primitive, but the sheer numbers are unprecedented." The War Master's confidence returned as he processed this information. 8,000 primitives against 300 Scarth capital ships? They're either insane or ignorant. "Recall all landing parties. We'll destroy this pathetic rescue attempt before returning to our harvest." As the Scarth fleet began to reposition for combat, the first human transmissions reached their communications array. The voice that emerged from the speakers carried an accent the human slave recognized as Terran military standard, speaking in the ancient language of humanity. "Scarth vessels, this is Admiral Sarah Chen commanding the Terran Liberation Fleet. You are ordered to cease hostilities against Valdoria Prime and withdraw from this system immediately. You have 30 minutes to comply before we open fire." The bridge fell silent as the audacity of the demand sank in. Then Graktul began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal that sent shivers through his enslaved crew. "Reply to the humans," he ordered. "Tell them that the Scarth Horde has never retreated from inferior forces. Tell them their primitive fleet will make an excellent addition to our slave ships." The response that came back would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the moment the Scarth first encountered something they had never faced before. A species that fought without calculation, without fear, and without any regard for acceptable losses. War Master Graktul, this is Admiral Chen. I've reviewed your response. Here's ours. We didn't come here to negotiate. We came here to extract our friends and eliminate a threat to galactic peace. You have 29 minutes to withdraw. After that, we're going to show you why Earth is classified as a death world. As if to emphasize the point, the human fleet began to advance. The formation was unlike anything in Scarth tactical databases. Rather than maintaining safe distances and establishing firing solutions, the human ships accelerated directly toward the Scarth formation at maximum velocity, their engines burning so hot that some of the smaller vessels appeared to be on the verge of structural failure. Graktul's tactical advisor studied the human approach with growing alarm. War Master, their tactics make no sense. They're charging directly into our fire zones. They're not even attempting to maintain formation integrity. This violates every principle of space combat. Then they'll die quickly, Graktul growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Something about the human approach was deeply unsettling. It spoke of a mindset that his species, despite their reputation for ruthlessness, didn't truly understand. The first engagement began when a squadron of human destroyers, their hulls scarred from hasty conversion and their weapons obviously jury-rigged, opened fire on a Scarth cruiser at point-blank range. The human ships absorbed devastating damage, their primitive armor no match for Scarth energy weapons. But they didn't retreat. They didn't attempt to withdraw to safe firing range. Instead, they closed distance until they were literally ramming the larger Scarth vessel while continuing to fire everything they had. The Scarth cruiser's shields failed under the unexpected assault. Its hull buckled as 3 human destroyers physically crashed into its superstructure while detonating their remaining ordnance. The massive vessel, which had participated in dozens of conquests, broke apart in a brilliant explosion that illuminated both fleets. Impossible, breathed Graktul's advisor. They sacrificed an entire squadron to destroy a single cruiser. No species fights like this. The mathematics are insane. But the humans were just getting started. Across the battlefield, the pattern repeated. Human ships ignored tactical doctrine entirely, instead using ramming attacks, point-blank bombardments, and suicide runs that defied every principle of space combat. They treated their own ships as expendable weapons, throwing them at Scarth vessels with complete disregard for crew survival. Admiral Chen's voice crackled across the communications array as the battle intensified. All vessels, this is command. Remember why we're here. The Valdorians asked for help. Everyone we save down there is someone who gets to see their family again. Make every shot count. Make every sacrifice matter. The human tactical approach began to make terrible sense as the Scarth fleet found itself overwhelmed not by superior technology or numbers, but by an enemy that simply refused to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. When human ships were damaged beyond repair, they didn't withdraw. They accelerated toward the nearest enemy vessel and detonated their power cores. When human formations were broken, individual ships continued fighting alone until they were destroyed or found new targets. Most unsettling of all was the communications traffic between human vessels. The Scarth were accustomed to hearing screams of terror and pleas for mercy as their enemies died. Instead, the human channels carried messages of encouragement, tactical updates, and what could only be described as jokes. They were actually joking as they died. This is Captain Rodriguez of the mining vessel Lucky Strike. My ship's falling apart, but I've got one more torpedo. Anyone know if Scarth ships are flammable? Let's find out. Lucky Strike, this is Captain Williams on the Asteroid Miner 3. Race you to that dreadnought. Loser buys drinks when we get to Valhalla. The human slave at the communications station found tears streaming down his face as he listened to his species fighting with a joy and determination he had never imagined possible. These weren't soldiers following orders. These were civilians who had volunteered to die for people they had never met because it was the right thing to do. War Master Graktul watched in growing horror as his fleet began to take serious casualties. The humans were losing ships at a rate of 5-1, but they had brought 8,000 vessels, and they showed no signs of wavering. More disturbing, their primitive weapons were proving surprisingly effective when delivered at point-blank range. The Scarth had never faced an enemy willing to exchange one ship for one ship in every engagement. "Sir," his advisor reported with barely concealed panic, "we've lost 47 capital ships and over 200 support vessels. The humans have lost approximately 1,800 ships, but their remaining forces are pressing the attack. They're not withdrawing. They're not even slowing down." Through the chaos of battle, a new transmission reached the Scarth flagship. This one came directly from Admiral Chen's command vessel, the TDF Resolution, as it burned through space toward the Bone Render with its engines at maximum output and its hull glowing from heat and battle damage. "War Master Graktul, I hope you're watching this." Chen's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "You wanted to know what humans do when the innocent are threatened. You wanted to understand how Deathworlders fight. Pay attention, because this is humanity's gift to bullies everywhere." The Resolution, its weapons blazing and its hull beginning to buckle from accumulated damage, rammed directly through two Scarth destroyers before opening fire on the Bone Render at zero range. The massive dreadnought's shields flared and failed under the concentrated assault. For the first time in his career, War Master Graktul felt something he had never experienced before: the cold touch of genuine fear. As explosions rocked his flagship and human ships continued their relentless assault, Graktul realized he had encountered something beyond his understanding. The humans weren't fighting to win. They weren't fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for something his species couldn't comprehend: the simple principle that good people don't abandon friends in need, regardless of the cost. The tide of battle had turned, but not in the way any tactical manual would have predicted. After 6 hours of the most brutal space combat in recorded galactic history, the Scarth Horde found itself in an impossible position. They had superior technology, better training, and more powerful individual ships. Yet they were losing. War Master Graktul stood amid the sparking ruins of his command bridge, watching display after display show the systematic destruction of his fleet. The humans had lost over 6,000 ships, but the Scarth had lost something far more valuable: their reputation for invincibility. Word of this battle would spread across the galaxy, and every oppressed world would know that the supposedly unconquerable Horde could be defeated. What terrified Graktul most was the realization that the humans weren't even fighting with their full strength. These were converted civilian vessels, mining ships, cargo haulers, and colonial transports hastily fitted with weapons. The actual Terran military fleet represented perhaps 10% of the attacking force. The rest were ordinary citizens who had volunteered to die for strangers. Admiral Chen's command ship, the Resolution, had been destroyed an hour ago, but command had immediately transferred to Captain Morrison aboard the converted colony ship New Hope. The change in leadership hadn't even slowed the human assault. If anything, the humans seemed to fight harder after each loss, as if their fallen comrades' deaths had only strengthened their resolve. "War Master," his tactical advisor reported, his voice barely audible over the sound of hull breaches and emergency klaxons. "The humans have broken through our outer defense line. They're moving toward the planet. Our landing forces are requesting immediate evacuation." Graktul's scarred face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Evacuation? The Scarth do not evacuate. We have 3 times their remaining numbers." "Sir, the mathematics have changed. The humans have demonstrated they will trade any number of ships for ours. At current exchange rates, they will have functional vessels remaining when our fleet is destroyed. And sir," the advisor's voice dropped to a whisper, The humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're calling for the Valdorians to hold on. That help is coming. They're coordinating rescue operations while still fighting. Through the static of damaged communication systems, fragments of human transmissions reached the Scarth Bridge. The content was unlike anything in their experience of warfare. Instead of tactical updates and damage reports, the communications carried messages of hope and determination. This is Search and Rescue Squadron 7. We've located a Valdorian shelter complex in Grid Section 42. Estimate 4,000 survivors. Preparing for immediate extraction. Cover us, people. We're going in. Copy that, Rescue 7. This is the freight hauler Big Mama. My ship's shot to pieces, but the cargo bay's still intact. I'll run interference while you load the civilians. Big Mama, this is Captain Torres on the Paradise Lost. My engines are gone, but my weapons still work. I'll keep the Scarth off you until the last civilian is aboard. Graktul listened to these exchanges with growing incomprehension. The humans were conducting rescue operations in the middle of a fleet engagement. They were risking their combat vessels to save civilians they had never met. It violated every principle of military logic. But the humans weren't finished demonstrating their incomprehensible nature. As Scarth forces on the planet's surface began to realize their fleet was losing, they attempted to use Valdorian civilians as hostages and human shields. The response from the human ground forces was immediate and terrifying. Captain Jennifer Walsh of the Terran Marines had been leading the evacuation of a Valdorian city when Scarth troops seized a school full of children. The Scarth commander, believing he understood human psychology, transmitted an ultimatum: withdraw from the planet or watch the children die. Walsh's response would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as a perfect example of human tactical thinking. Instead of negotiating or withdrawing, she ordered every human unit on the planet to converge on the school. What followed was the most precise and brutal urban assault in recorded history. The humans didn't storm the building. They didn't attempt to negotiate. Instead, they systematically eliminated every Scarth position in a 12-block radius, then used mining charges to create tunnels directly into the school's basement. Within 20 minutes, they had extracted every Valdorian child through routes the Scarth hadn't even known existed. When the Scarth commander realized what had happened, he found himself surrounded by humans who had appeared as if from nowhere. His last transmission to the fleet was a scream of pure terror as he discovered what happened to species that threatened human friends. Back in orbit, War Master Graktul received reports of similar incidents across the planet. Wherever Scarth forces tried to use Valdorian civilians as leverage, they found themselves facing humans who approached the situation not as a hostage rescue, but as pest elimination. The humans seemed to take personal offense at threats against the innocent, responding with a focused brutality that shocked even the Scarth. As the battle entered its 8th hour, the impossible had become inevitable. The Scarth 7th Fleet, which had conquered systems and enslaved entire species, was being systematically destroyed by converted civilian ships crewed by volunteers. More than half of Graktul's capital ships had been eliminated, and human rescue operations were evacuating Valdorian civilians at an astounding rate. The final blow came from an unexpected source. The human communications officer on the Bone Renders Bridge, the slave who had been forced to relay orders for years, quietly stood and walked to the weapons control station. The Scarth crew, focused on the external battle, didn't notice until it was too late. "This is Communications Officer David Park, formerly of the colony ship Bright Future," he announced as he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. "To my fellow humans out there, it's been an honor serving with you. Tell Earth that some of us never forgot who we are." The massive dreadnought shook as internal explosions ripped through its hull. Graktul turned toward the human in rage and disbelief. "You fool! You'll die with us!" David Park smiled for the first time in 5 years. "War Master, you still don't understand humans, do you? Sometimes the best thing you can do is choose how you die. I choose to die free, taking you with me." The explosion of the bone render marked the end of organized Scarth resistance. The remaining enemy ships, faced with the complete destruction of their command structure and the continuing human assault, did something unprecedented in Scarth military history. They surrendered. Captain Morrison, now commanding the human fleet from the battered colony ship New Hope, received the Scarth surrender with characteristic human practicality. Scarth vessels. This is the Terran Liberation Fleet. You will power down all weapons and assume surrender formation. Any ship that attempts to flee or resist will be destroyed. You will also transfer all slaves and prisoners to our vessels immediately. The aftermath of the Battle of Valdoria Prime would reshape galactic politics for centuries. The humans had rescued over 90% of the Valdorian population, evacuating them to temporary colonies in human space while their homeworld was rebuilt. More significantly, they had liberated thousands of slaves from dozens of species that the Scarth had captured over the years. But the most profound change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. The species that had been considered primitive and reckless had demonstrated something that more advanced civilizations had forgotten. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the necessary thing to do, regardless of the cost. 3 weeks after the battle, Elder Kethmon of the Valdorians stood before the Galactic Council to address the assembly. His people had been saved by the most unlikely of rescuers, and his words carried the weight of profound gratitude. "Honored council members," he began, his voice steady despite the recent trauma his people had endured. "We called for help when our world was dying, and one species answered. Not because they calculated advantage or sought reward, but because it was right. The humans lost over 6,000 ships and 30,000 lives to save people they had never met." He paused, looking directly at each council representative. "The question before this assembly is simple. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in? One where the strong prey upon the weak while the civilized calculate acceptable losses? Or one where good people help each other regardless of the cost?" The human representative to the council, Ambassador James Mitchell, spoke when the floor was offered to him. His words were simple but profound. "The Valdorians asked for help. We gave it. That's what friends do. That's what humans do. And if anyone else in this galaxy needs help, they can call Earth. We'll answer." In the months that followed, something unprecedented happened in galactic politics. Species after species began to realign their diplomatic relationships, not based on military power or economic advantage, but on a simple question. In a crisis, would these people help us? The Scarth Horde, their reputation shattered and their leadership destroyed, found their remaining forces hunted across the galaxy by a coalition that included many of their former victims. The liberated slaves had returned to their homeworlds with stories of human courage that inspired resistance movements on every Scarth-controlled planet. Within a year, the most feared military force in the galaxy had been reduced to scattered refugees. Their empire collapsed not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that they could be beaten by people who cared more about doing right than surviving. The humans, meanwhile, returned to their peaceful pursuits with characteristic modesty. They rebuilt the Valdorian homeworld, incorporated the rescued slaves into their colonies until they could return home, and went back to exploring the galaxy with the same curiosity and determination that had brought them to Valdoria Prime. But across the galaxy, the message had been received and understood. Earth had announced its presence not through conquest or economic dominance, but through an act of pure moral courage. The Deathworlders had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. And when the next call for help came, it wouldn't take 30 minutes of debate to decide who would answer. The galaxy had learned that some questions have simple answers, and some people can be counted on to do the right thing, no matter what it costs. The humans had kept their promise. They had shown the galaxy what happens when Deathworlders hear a cry for help. and the galaxy would never be the same. Selves wondering if they had just witnessed the beginning of Earth's greatest folly, or if they were about to discover something new about the nature of courage itself.